Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Your Legislators. I'm Anthony Morneau. On this week's program, we are speaking with New Mexico District 38 Democratic State Senator Carrie Hamblen. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator.
Anthony, it is so lovely to see your face. Thank you for having me on the program today.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on the program. I want to talk with you about COVID-19 and how the state is responding to COVID-19 during this legislative session. The New Mexico House of Representatives has taken an approach where most of their proceedings are online. The Senate, a different approach. They're still meeting in sessions. Now, can you share with us your thoughts about what the Senate has done? Do you agree with how things have been going so far with meeting in person?
You know, it's kind of a mixed bag, and I certainly don't envy the folks from Legislative Council Services who have had to figure out the logistics of this. You know, right before the session started, the main focus was how to be able to have legislators in the building safely with COVID. So masks are required, there's sanitation, we're required to get tests every week. And then all of a sudden, the insurrection happened. And then we had to start talking about safety. And so every day I go through 2 checkpoints to get into the Capitol because there's still those concerns. We only have a couple days left in the session. So, I'm really grateful for the State National Guard for being here. But getting back to your question, Anthony, with the COVID, part of it is that our Constitution requires that we be here physically on the first day of the session. We have to do what's called sign the book. And that's where the clerk, the chief clerk, calls out our name. We come up and we sign the book. We register that we are here. And so, with that, and we can talk all about constitutional reform, with that, we're required to be in person. Now, after that, the rules can be set for the Senate chambers, just like the rules were set for the House chambers. Certainly, we've taken 2 different approaches to how we get legislation passed and in committee. In our case with the Senate, it was kind of a hybrid version. So the first couple of weeks of the session, we were in either committees virtually, and then every 7 days, we would be here physically for the reading of the bills. And that's where you are able to present your bills on the floor of the Senate to either pass, to vote, to go to the House. And so physically, we were there for that. We did a lot of committee meetings virtually in the first couple of weeks. And then the last 3 weeks, we have been here almost every day. We do have a kind of an hour limitation. We try to only stay on the floor about 3 to 4 hours. There are senators who feel much safer being able to be in their offices. And that's just because many of them are caretakers of their elderly parents, or they have either compromised immunities, or they have somebody in their family, so they don't want to run that risk. We are required to wear masks on the floor at all times. I guess in the past you've been able to eat at your little station on the floor. That is no longer allowed because we want to keep masks on. If you do have beverages, you are drinking with a straw, and or just quickly. So I think we're taking a lot of precautions. I don't know if one way is better than the other. This is really, just kind of new territory.
It is new territory, but I want to ask you, do you feel safe?
I do feel safe. Everybody is walking around with masks or double masks. And it's, we're monitoring or respecting social distancing as much as we can. In the chambers themselves, I don't know if you've seen it, but you can always, if you are a webcast wonk and want to watch the legislative session, you can go to nmlegis.gov and look at the webcasts. We have plastic dividers, big plastic dividers between us. We are doing as best as we can. I do feel safe. I do feel that the Legislative Council Services has done an incredible job on trying to make sure that we are taking every single precaution possible.
Now, the House has taken most of their proceedings online. Democratic leadership in the House has touted participation by New Mexicans that's happening this legislative session due to most proceedings being online. You mentioned the website. There's been announced that there's been record hits on the website viewing what's happening in the New Mexico legislature. Brian Egolf, the Speaker of the House, has said that the online proceedings aren't going to go away and has touted the participation. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that the Senate needs to adapt to this and with online proceedings?
Absolutely. We've seen, and I remember, having to drive up and hope that, some bill that I was interested in got heard in committee. And what I'm finding is that sometimes those bills get rolled over and they're not heard again until 2 days later when the committee meets again. So what I feel is that, with a lot of things, COVID has shown us how things should really be being done and ways that we can modify those. So, for access purposes, there are folks who are able to testify in committee using their phones. They don't have to take off of work. They don't have to spend money on a hotel and gas and food, and they're able to testify. And that's where I'm really excited about seeing all the representation of people all over the state being able to testify in these committee hearings because they are virtually. And so I think what we're going to find, and that's the conversations that we're having, is that we are going to pull the best of this experience out of that as we kind of get back to normal in whatever form normal is. But I do feel that the virtual committee opportunities for people has really expanded. On the other hand, though, there are those folks who don't have access to the technology, so they're still not able to participate in that. And that's where a lot of the legislation during this session has really focused on is broadband or connectivity. It's been a major priority from the governor. There are a number of bills that are going throughout both the House and the Senate to help increase the access to broadband. Our Finance Committee is looking at all of the money that's available for broadband and connectivity. And, unfortunately, and this is kind of the case with New Mexico, is that we're behind. We should have been forward thinking in this and looking at infrastructure, looking at rights of way, looking at when there are companies, telephone companies or electrical companies that are laying new lines, they need to also be laying those lines for technology and connectivity. And they weren't. So now what we have to do is go back and redig that stuff up and then put it in line. So there's a lot of things that I think COVID, and as horrible as it's been, there are a lot of things that we are realizing should have been a priority a long time ago. And there are many of us who have been talking about this who are like, welcome to the party. Thank you for joining us. Because now we're all together realizing this needs to get done.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on how the state addresses that digital divide. I want to move on and talk with you about some legislation that's advancing in the New Mexico legislature, and that's paid sick leave. Paid sick leave legislation, a bill that features 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours worked, 64 hours allotted per year. This is House Bill 20. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this because the Albuquerque Journal editorial board recently wrote an op-ed talking about an opinion piece on business leaders being kind of left out of the decision making with this. Now, you deal with a lot of small businesses with your work with the Green Chamber here in the Las Cruces area. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this piece of legislation. Do you think that small businesses, business leaders, and their thoughts were left out of this legislation?
I wasn't the sponsor of the bill. However, and you're right, Anthony, I walk a really fine line when it comes down to really advocating for the impact, the importance of locally owned businesses and what they do in the community. And I will always stick by that. And when I decided to run for this seat, always talked about that I will be one that advocates for employees, but I'll also be one that advocates for small businesses. And so, paid sick leave is really focusing on employees. I mean, think about it. We've seen this during the pandemic where because people couldn't take off, if they started to exhibit symptoms of COVID, they couldn't go home. They couldn't leave work because they didn't have that opportunity. They didn't have that that security that they would be able to do that. And then what happened is that then the other staffs would get, the other staff members or servers or any of the other employees would get sick or test positive, and then the whole business would have to shut down. And that's not an effective way of running your business. And but then on the other hand, and so it's really taking care of employees and making sure that people are safe. On the
Do
other
you
hand, I'm
support this
also,
legislation, though?
yes, I do. And I did.
Okay, now
I did.
I know you mentioned, you obviously have some concerns with business owners. What are those?
Absolutely. Well, I know that small business owners are like, I can't afford to pay this. Part of it is the business model that's being used that doesn't address increase in wages, increase in benefits. And in many cases, small businesses can't afford employee benefits. Like the Affordable Care Act is not good for small businesses. They can't provide benefits for their employees. And so we're looking at employee retainability. This is one way of keeping your employees with you. And many of our New Mexico families, our New Mexico businesses operate like a family. Their staff is their family. And I think of like one of my favorite restaurants in Mesilla. I mean, they're family to each other. And so I know they want to take care of each other. This is a way of being able to take care of your employees, allowing them that if they are sick, that they still will, that they do not have to worry about making ends meet and paying their bills. Now, on the other hand, the business is like, okay, well, then I'm having to do that. Well, yeah, you are. However, I feel confident that much of the legislation that is being passed and the conversations that are being had, that there are a number of resources, funds, grants, assistance to small businesses that are coming up that are going to help them make that adjustment to providing paid sick leave. And by the way, it doesn't go into effect for, I believe, a year.
Do you think that's enough time for businesses, especially small businesses, to adapt?
I do. And the reason why I say that, Anthony, is because when we've had these discussions, I've made it a point to say that we need to have a task force that provides businesses with, these are the changes that have been instituted at the Senate level. Here are all the benefits that you can apply for. Because it's so overwhelming. Right now, businesses are still trying to keep their doors open as we like ping pong back and forth to yellow or green or red. And with Texas loosening restrictions, I really worry that we're going to go back into the red again. And so, there's a lot of uncertainty about that. But I've been stressing with my Senate colleagues that we need to provide resources, and we can certainly work with the Economic Development Department. I get to work with colleagues in the Greater Chamber, in West, and SBDC on how we can provide the easiest way for businesses to have access to the resources and the bills and the legislation that has been passed to benefit them while they start incorporating these new things that will make sure that their employees are safe and taken care of. And I feel confident, and certainly I'm one that's like, I get a little skeptical about things, but I do feel confident that with all of the legislation that has been passed to help support our small businesses, that the paid sick leave is not going to be the detriment that people think it is.
I see. We know at least 17 states, including Washington, D.C., have passed similar policies. We'll wait and see what the New Mexico legislature does with this issue. I want to move on and talk with you about business recovery in the state and the economy's recovery. There's been a lot of proposals by state lawmakers. A major one has been proposing the legalization of the recreational use of cannabis in New Mexico. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you support this effort?
Absolutely. I campaigned on it. I think that we need to diversify our revenue stream. I think what we've seen is kind of the ups and downs and of our dependence on oil and gas. And, I'm all for going to renewable energy, but I also think the practicality is that we can't say we're not going to depend on oil and gas tomorrow. That's just not realistic. We have people whose jobs and livelihoods depend on it. We have a state budget that has been designed completely around oil and gas revenues. It's not practical. So what I look at is that we have to start diversifying our economy, creating jobs in those areas where people can make either what they're making now or more and support their families and put food on their tables. And I feel that, the legalizing cannabis isn't like the be all end all. It's certainly not going to solve all those problems, but it's one of those ways that we can start looking at diversifying our revenue stream, creating jobs, being realistic. You know, we've got medical marijuana. There are many people in my life that benefit from this so that they don't have to take pharmaceutical medication. And, you know, we've got bigger things to worry about than somebody um, enjoying the benefits of cannabis. Obviously, I don't want people to be stoned at work. I don't want people to be stoned when they drive. But I also recognize that we have an opportunity to create jobs and not penalize, especially communities of color, for minor possessions of weed when it's really something that should not be regulated. And we've got a bigger issue of having it federal, but
There,
we can do it right now at the state level.
well, there's time running out on the legislative session as we tape this
I know.
show. There's been several proposals by lawmakers on what bill to pass. There's many different thoughts on how to do this. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, the governor set up a commission to look at just about every single angle dealing with this issue, and state lawmakers are still kind of dragging their feet on what they're going to do with this bill. We had Senator Joseph Cervantes on the program a couple weeks ago. He chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee. He said that this is a big money deal for the insiders, so he's skeptical about this proposal to make cannabis legal in New Mexico. What are your thoughts on this? Is this a big money deal for insiders?
I agree with Senator Cervantes. There are folks in the state who have kind of a monopoly on plant production and how much they can grow and how much they can sell. And that has been my issue all along, too. There's a couple of businesses that do that, and they have a monopoly, and that's not fair. We have smaller businesses. We have smaller, we're currently providing for medical marijuana that can easily go over to legalized cannabis. And they are worried that what they are going to do is get outproduced and just pretty much swept under the rug. And so, you know, we've had 3 or 4, I mean, I wasn't even expecting 3 or 4 cannabis bills coming to the Tax, Business, and Transportation Committee. But sure enough, it did. I mean, it was a 5-hour debate. And our committee chair, Benny Shendo, said, y'all need to get in a room and get together and figure it out. And so there's been a lot of conversations. I'm grateful for Judiciary because even though Judiciary killed one of my bills, the whole point is to make sure that it's a bill that's solid and that you're not going to see it stalled in court. And so I don't envy Senator Cervantes one bit for doing this. And I also want to make sure that our small producers have a chance. And I won't support a bill if it doesn't.
Is there any bill right now that you have your eyes on that you think you could support?
No, because there's combinations of a couple of bills that like, ooh, this one's good, and then this one's good, and this one, I don't know
Okay,
if I'm
so
with that.
what are you going to have to see in order to support a bill to legalize cannabis in New Mexico?
That small businesses and small producers have a fighting chance. That it's not designed to benefit these inside producers. That is the key for me. I've even said it to every single one of the bill sponsors. If this is going to put small businesses and small producers out of business, I am not going to vote for your bill. And yet I campaigned on legalizing cannabis, but I've got people in Las Cruces that are small producers that are like, look, the way this bill is set up, this is not going to help. And that's not a job creator if it puts businesses out because 1 or 2 people have the monopoly over it. So that's really the deal breaker for me.
House Bill 12 that was passed in the House would allow for the expungement of criminal records for certain cannabis-related charges. Do you support that?
Yes, I do. I feel that there are people who have been incarcerated because of small, minor possessions. I mean, obviously, if there have been larger crimes that have been committed, that I certainly don't. But if they have been incarcerated because of small possession amounts, we've got better things to spend our taxpayer money on.
Now,
and so
Senate Bill 288 also allows for cities and counties to vote on whether they would license a business to sell legal cannabis if approved. Is that something you would approve? You would vote for, or do you agree with that?
You know, I understand the need that there might be some smaller communities that maybe are worried about potential drug problems, because I know that there are communities in our state, and we've had these conversations on the floor. There are communities in our state that have a higher rate of drug problems, either meth, crack, or any of the other whatever new drugs there are. And so I understand that concern. I think, and so I do support that, like, different municipalities can have the right to say that. And that's where the communities really need to come into play to rally around their city officials or their county officials to support it. I think it's
So
important just
it
to
is,
look
you
at
do
that.
support that for
Yeah.
cities and counties to make their own decisions
Mhm.
on this issue. Okay, now time is running out on this. Do you think it's actually going to happen this legislative session? Or do you think there's going to be a special legislative session? We had Representative Rebecca Dow, a Republican, on the program last week. She said she's hearing that there's going to be a special session if cannabis is not passed, along with the liquor reform, which did pass. But your
Yeah,
thoughts
the
on
liquor
this?
reform was a big deal. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic that we have, at the time that we're recording it, it's Tuesday. It is the 16th of March. It's kind of hard for me to, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
16th of March that we're recording this show. And so, we're on the Senate floor, we're doing twice a day sessions. So in about 45 minutes, I'll be going back down to the floor for our day session. Then we'll have committee meetings, and then we'll come back again at night and stay probably until 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, making sure that legislation gets passed. And I've been told by senators who have been here before that this is the nuttiest week of the legislature because there's stuff just moving through like you would not believe. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I also won't be surprised if we're called into a special session. Cannabis is a complicated issue. There are a lot of players involved, there are a lot of factors involved. And if it takes a special session to make sure this happens, I know that there's a commitment to make sure it does happen. But I also know that there's a commitment to make sure that it's done right to where it doesn't hurt the business opportunities that we could get from
So
this.
what we're looking at right now with lawmakers and dragging their feet on this, and it obviously being a complicated issue for New Mexico to adopt, do you support a special session happening?
Yeah, I would. If it
Okay.
means legalizing cannabis so that we can move ahead on this, I certainly would. I mean,
Oh,
that's what you sign up for when you run for this office.
I understand. I want to talk with you more about another issue, and that is environmental concerns in New Mexico. You sit on the Conservation Committee. I'd like to hear your thoughts on New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham writing President Biden and asking and telling him that his proposal or his implementation of the banning of new oil and gas leases on public lands could hurt New Mexico in various ways. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts on this issue? Do you think that President Biden's action with his administration, closing off new leases for oil and gas on public lands, do you think it's hurting New Mexico?
That's such a complicated issue. I obviously personally do not feel that we need to have oil and gas on public lands. I think there are plenty of there are oil and gas industries that are sitting on, I believe it's 2,000 opportunities for oil rigs. And, um, I think the oil and gas lobby is a pretty hefty lobby, and they wield a lot of power. I
Is
don't
it
know.
is it hurting New Mexicans? So I mean, in New Mexico, and obviously the budget is tied to oil and gas revenues very heavily. I'd like to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts on this. I mean, it's obviously complicated. It sounds like, but I mean, yes or no? Do you think the Biden's administration's move was the correct one?
No, actually, to answer your question, I don't. I think it was something that really needed to be consulted with the governor, because our situation is a little unique. I think there are other states that are also in the same boat, where their budgets have been specifically designed around the success of oil and gas. And when you start looking at that, you start impacting those budgets, which means those programs that are funded by the budgets get impacted as well. So I do think that there needed to be a conversation. I'm glad the governor went to the White House to have that conversation. But does it mean that I support oil and gas on public lands? No. I think we need to, and that's where this legislature and I think this current body, those of us that have been elected, are able to have those conversations, is respecting the place that oil and gas has had in our state history and in the funding of our budget. But I think we're also at a really important crossroads where we can start looking at different ways of getting that money into those programs and not be heavily dependent on something that is hurting our environment.
Okay, we just have about a minute left, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on New Mexico lawmakers taking a look at how the legislature is working and the whole, pulling the lens back and seeing what's working and what's not. Before we started this program, we had a little conversation about, is the New Mexico legislature set up to face 21st century problems? I'd like to hear your thoughts on the legislature meeting 30-day, 60-day sessions, and also, do you support paying state lawmakers?
Yes. So our Constitution needs to be amended. The 60-day, 30-day session, it's not practical. Not paying your legislators, and by all means, it's not that I want to get a paycheck. We are the only state in the country that has a volunteer legislature. I get a per diem every day during the legislature that pays for my gas, food, and lodging, and that's it. It's not like I'm making a whole lot of money. I've been very lucky that my job as the CEO of the Green Chamber, that my board of directors has given me permission to do this. But what happens is that when you don't pay your legislature, you're eliminating 95% of people who live in this state from participating in creating policy and law because they have to work to support their families. So when you don't pay your legislators, you are eliminating voices that need to be at the table that can't because they have to make a living. So if you're serving as a senator or a legislator, you're either retired, independently wealthy, or you have a job that allows you to do that. I'm the third, but not everybody does. So I am in full support of paying the legislature, but also that we need to amend our Constitution.
Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us, State Senator Carrie Hamblen.
Thank you, Anthony.
And we want to thank you for joining us for Your Legislators. I'm Anthony Morneau. We'll see you next time.